Hello and welcome back to Crypto Live Leak. My name is Ken, and of course, thank you for joining us here today. And before anything starts, be sure to subscribe to our channel and sign on for those notifications. Today we have the lovely guests, Arthur and Kathleen. How are you guys doing here today?
Good. Very well, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining our show. We know we just had Kathleen down for the Tezos Boston meetup, and we wanted to go over with you guys some of the questions that were brought up during that meetup, and glad to have both of you on at this time. So, if you guys are both the founder and the co-founder of Tezos, and if you would just give us a little bit of your background, what made you get into cryptocurrency? More specifically, what made you want to start Tezos?
What interested me in the Tezos project was the aspects on coordination. So, I looked at blockchains as coordination tools, and one of the most interesting coordination tool you can build is money. It's a tool for social coordination, and so that's probably the most natural thing you can build in the blockchain. But you can build stronger coordination than that. And the recursive aspect of having coordination over the entirety of the commons of the blockchain, including innovation, is what really attracted me.
Yeah, and I kind of drifted very into the cryptocurrency space because Arthur has a delightfully obsessive personality, and Bitcoin really started to tickle him back in like 2012, 2013. And the more I got to know about it, the more I felt like Tezos just got him on the ball in terms of what it was addressing, and really leveraging the fullest extent of what this technology could do.
And so this is, it makes Bitcoin, the community around Bitcoin, there was a lot of forks early in their network. So their idea was, oh, it's okay, we let these people fork Bitcoin, and if any good ideas come of it, we can just fold it into Bitcoin later on. But there wasn't actually a good method to do that. So it's interesting what you developed here with Tezos, the self-amending ledger side of things.
I think like the papers from 2014, it really reflects a lot of trends that were going on at the time, which is still been going on in some essences, which is like the only two real original protocols that we've seen come out of the ecosystem have been Ethereum and Bitcoin. A lot of projects are based on that original code base, and yet like those two lack the sort of introspection that Tezos has. And so we think that what Tezos offers is pretty unique to the ecosystem.
And a little bit of a tidbit here, you guys were actually going to call this project something different and decided to settle on Tezos after the fact. What was that first name you guys were going to call it?
Oh, well, there was a lot of, commentary when Tezos came out about, what it could have been called. Like, one of the names that I thought was kind of funny was Metacoin, but that's, obviously a pretty bad name, and it was already taken by another project. And Novacoin, there's a bunch of other ones that are just, kind of silly.
And Novacoin is based on Nomic. Metacoin, I remember looking at Metacoin, and there was a project called Metacoin, and I remember reading a blog about it, and it was just this clone of Bitcoin with just different parameters. And there was this blog saying overall this is a pretty good coin, and based on what?
There's nothing meta about it.
No, that was a time where pretty much you had hundreds of altcoins which were just clones of Bitcoins with different parameters, and people were still weigh the pros and cons. That was kind of a hilarious time.
Yeah, that's a cool little inside tidbit there. And to get onto a more deeper subject here, so self-governance. What is the current system for protocol upgrade proposals?
Tezos, one of the main taglines it has is that it has this ability to self-amend. And so it gets very meta once you start to consider that actually the governance process itself can be amended. So without being too prescriptive, because obviously the first way that this takes hold is very, determines kind of the candor and the participation of the whole ecosystem. Obviously, if it's just one person determining everything, you don't really have the same ecosystem that's leaning towards governance. So the first instantiation of governance in Tezos is a two-phase vote with. And I'll let Arthur explain exactly what the conditions are, because he's I'm sure he'll wrap it in very accurate technical descriptions.
Yeah, so the governance starts with the simplest model you can have, which is just a simple vote, and it's a two-phase. So it's a two-phase procedure. At first, someone submits a proposal, which opens a proposal window. So if someone submits a proposal, you don't want that person to necessarily just dominate the discourse just because it's submitted a proposal. So then you have a time window where other people can also submit a proposal. And then the time window closes, and you have an approval vote. So you can think of this as everyone can upvote or downvote each of the proposals that were made during that window. And the goal of the approval voting is to just restrict it to a single proposal. So once you find the most voted proposal, you submit that one to another vote, which is just a binary vote. It's yes or no. Do you want to keep with the old system or approve this new one? And you have conditions. So there's a quorum that must be met, but that adjusts over time based on participation. And there's a supermajority that you need to have. And then when that happens, automatically a test network is spun up with this new protocol, just as a precaution, as an added precaution. Runs for a period of time, and after this period of time, there's yet another vote to really, really confirm that this should really replace the old protocol. And if that goes through, then the new protocol automatically replaces the old protocol. So that's basically the initial governance model, and it has a lot of built-in delays which are added for safety. Some people imagine that you vote and immediately it's a new protocol. No, there's a lot of time. There's a lot of time for reflection and also coordination.
Okay, and is there a certain percentage of yes votes that need to occur on the proposal for it to be accepted?
Yeah, like I said, there's a supermajority. I think right now it's set at 80%. I think the original paper proposed 60%. So maybe one of the first proposals could be to reduce that, but I think that's a little high. But basically, initially you have to these numbers initially they're going to be pulled out of thin air. There's not a huge body of research or experiments that you can rely upon to choose those parameters.
And so, again, this is where it gets a little bit more complex. So the way the protocol is designed, you can actually amend the governance mechanism. And I know there were some questions around how to actually sandbox a change to the governance. Is this done in a testnet, something to the governance? Is this done in a testnet, something that runs in parallel to the main chain? Or how do you actually sandbox that?
I'm not sure what you mean by sandbox here.
Sort of how is it tested before implementation to prove that the new governance system works? Like, is there a test vote that occurs for a protocol upgrade within this proposed governance change model?
Not necessarily. I mean, if what you were changing would be the governance model, and then you would say, oh, we're going to run the test network, we will have a test governance. I mean, it would be hard. Really, the point of the test network is mostly to check that the code runs and compiles, that doesn't crash everywhere. If you have something that's more subtle and or the effects are going to be more long-lived, it's not something you're going to find out by running a test network. So really, it's not sandbox. People are going to analyze a new proposal and decide, hey, on the face of it, does this look like a better governance system than the one we currently have?
Actually, I think the initial question that I think Ted is driven off of this. So the description that I gave is, you have this 3 layers in the generic network shell, and how do you actually change the governance mechanism? Is it just a matter of changing the parameters of one aspect of this, or is it more complicated? This is kind of the initial question, which is always interesting.
Well, it's not like you're changing a parameter. And really, I think people imagine that the changes, the amendments are a lot more parametric than what they really are. An amendment is a change on the entire protocol. So really, you can touch every part of it.
That's the gist of the question.
Yeah, definitely. And just as hearing what you're talking about, so what happens when, let's say, an upgrade happens and the protocol changes, but further down the line, you want to roll back to what you had previously? Is that possible, or is that a moot point? Once the change occurs.
Well, I mean, once the change occurs, the change has occurred. So if you wanted to roll back, you would need to have an amendment to roll it back.
Okay, so like another proposal could be given to go back to the original version of whatever that change was.
Yeah, you could do that. Okay,
excellent. And so, do you have any thoughts of where the governance model could go in the future? Something exotic you might be thinking of, say, separating the governance side of the token and, for instance, maybe even creating a secondary market for that governance piece?
So, I mean, there's a blog post that I have that I wrote maybe a month or 2 months ago on feeder key. So that was mentioned in an original Tezos paper. And the idea of feeder key is that it's really hard. It can be hard for people to evaluate proposal ex ante, but it's easy for them to evaluate them ex post. So it means after a proposal, after the proposal has been accepted and it's been a while, it's kind of easy for people to know if this was a good idea or not, retrospectively. Hindsight is 2020. So the idea is to use prediction markets. So you have you run a prediction market on a proposal and say, ultimately, is this proposal going to be a good thing if it's adopted? Are people going to be happy with that? And it's a way to harness the expertise of forecasters as a way to do governance. But yeah, go ahead.
The tagline behind feeder key is people vote on values but bet on beliefs. And so you might be more willing to place a bet on something that you think is more valuable in some sense than you are to locally signal another piece of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's Emmanuel Kant who talks about betting and says, if you take someone who's extremely sure about something, and as soon as you bet, all of a sudden they're seeing the other side and they're thinking more critically about this. So there's great value in betting on belief, and in general, refusing to bet on belief is basically the equivalent of bullshitting.
And so, just on the topic of oracles here, so what an oracle is what it's been explained to me was essentially the integration of real-world or outside data into the blockchain. There's a trusted third party that allows that to basically translate onto the blockchain. So how much of an update to the base protocol would it take for Oracle integration?
For Oracle integration, you can do oracles without changing the protocol. For example, Augur is a decentralized oracle system built on top of Ethereum, and it's not a protocol change in Ethereum. So you can implement that in smart contracts. You can implement that in a protocol. At the end of the day, that's not a big difference, at least for this specific application. The biggest problem is how do you actually build a decentralized oracle, and that's really there are really tricky issues behind that.
Well, there's a very simple way to have an oracle, which is just have one source sign off on everything, and then there's other ways that you can aggregate information, take a median of some value or something like that from several sources. But
yeah,
it's really, to what extent do you want to have to trust one entity versus the collective information or the collective validation of a group?
Well, really, I think what it boils down to is: are you trying to have some sort of crypto-economic scheme, or are you trying to have some sort of trusted sources? So one thing you could do is, you can do those. So you could decide, let's elect 12 different parties, and those parties will each sign a message, and then will be a source of ground truth. And, that probably works. But you could also say, no, we don't want to have any specific party in charge, and so it's really anyone can come in and put in their estimates, and it's really based on Schelling points. So the idea is that if the majority is honest, they're all going to pick the right value. When you reward people for picking the value that everyone else is going to pick, so you have an incentive, even for dishonest players, to coalesce around the majority. But there are ways to game these things as well. So overall, it's not what should I call it?
Perfect science?
It's not perfect science. It's really hard when you come to think of it and you get into some postmodernist philosophical questions like what is truth, what is social truth, what is ground truth. It's really messy, because at the end of the day you want consensus over truth, and that's not even something we have in society.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you get into the nihilistic school of oracle thought, which is that oracles are impossible, so why are you putting up with these crazy smart contracts? But that's something more niche inside of cryptocurrency.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the insight on that. And moving on to the smart contract aspect of Tezos. So these Tezos smart contracts have the ability to implement the formal verification. Can you guys dig a little bit deeper into the formal verification aspect, and also for a more general question, why Tezos over Ethereum?
So that's one of the most misunderstood aspects of Tezos smart contracts. So formal verification is a technique that lets you make mathematical proofs about the correctness of certain properties of your code. For example, you could have a smart contract that represents, multi-sig wallet, and you would say the only, you can prove that the only way to get money out of this is by getting signature from this and these people. So you can make this proofs. This is a very general technique, and it can be applied to any programming language. So you can do formal verification of Ethereum contract. You can do formal verification of Tezos contract. It's not a feature; it's a process. Now, bearing that in mind, it's not always an easy process. It's become a lot easier over the past few years, thanks to a lot of advances in software, in particular constraint solvers and SMT solvers. However, it's still an arduous process, and where it gets interesting is that depending on the language in which your programs are written, it can be an easier or harder process. And the Tezos smart contract language is designed in a way that makes the process easier. So if you want to build, if you want to do formal verification of your contracts, or if you want to be building tooling, as some people are, building tooling for formal verification of Tezos smart contracts, then you're going to have an easier time.
Okay, so that basically answers the general question there. So if you're looking for that formal verification implementation, it's easier to facilitate that with the Tezos smart contract. Excellent.
It is, yes.
And so why OCAML instead of, there's another bland programming language, Haskell? The joke was made in the audience at the time of the event, but so what exactly made you choose OCAML?
Well, the nice thing about OCAML is that in speed and benchmarks, it does actually remarkably well. So compile OCAML is very fast, and you can also do very fast Haskell code. But typically, the difference is that you can write idiomatic OCAML and it will be fast. Whereas if you want to be fast with Haskell, you have to write code that is not very Haskellish. Like you have to write dirty code in Haskell to be fast, whereas you can write beautiful OCAML code and still be fast. At least in my opinion. So that's one of the advantages of OCAML. You get a really good compromise point, I say, between the purity of the language and how fast it can actually run.
Okay, so the speed of the language, and now
it's the speed of the executables that you produce.
And it also is like one of the more older languages that uses things like common or whatever to help out. So there's a tradition there around things like formal verification.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's very much ingrained in French academia, which is something that you know very well as well.
So the most efficient tool for formal verification is the Coxer Improver, which is written in OCAML, and if you write formal proofs in Coq, you can extract OCAML programs for it. There's also another language, F star, which is very prominent in formal verification. F star basically looks like OCAML. F star compiles to OCAML code. So there's a very, very tight relationship between OCAML and the formal verification community.
Okay, understood. And some of the more technical members of our audience will appreciate that explanation there. And weird question. So can the base code of Tezos actually be changed, or can you build a different language on top of it? Then OCAML?
Yeah, so you can change it, and there's two ways you can change it. So there's the hackish way, which is to say, you can still do hard forks. And imagine that at some point, everyone is like, oh my god, why are we using OCAML? We should all really be using Haskell. You could just say, look, we're going to do a hard fork, and now our protocol is going to run in Haskell. This is a one-off, and we're just changing it. So that's a dirty way of changing it. But if you have a wide consensus and everyone wants to do that, you can do it. And then there's a purist way of doing it, which is to say, no, we really want to follow the governance procedure and nothing else. So the way you would do it is you would turn your protocol into a compiler for the new language. So you would write a compiler in OCAML for a new language, and now your protocol would consist of this OCAML compiler plus the text file containing your new protocol in your new language. So you can totally do that. You can change the language this way. That would be the very, very purest way of doing it.
So right now there's a strong traction with Tezos and OCAML because, for example, an upgrade in Tezos is defined as a piece of OCAML code.
Right. So the upgrade right now is defined as a piece of OCAML code, but again, you could change that. I don't see any strong reasons to do that. So
Yeah, exactly. There's many incentives to keep it the way it is, especially with all the great work from the Tezos Foundation and the funding of
yeah.
different programs around OCAML.
And also, even in the past few years, OCAML's gotten much more popular in other places aside from France where it originated. So it's not, yeah.
I mean, if there were a change of language, I don't think it would be for another language. I don't think it would be like, oh, let's move to Java. It would be more, you could imagine designing a programming language specifically for writing Tezos protocols, like a declarative language, domain-specific language for Tezos protocols, and you could progressively simplify the protocol by having it written in this very, very specific language. Or moving to, Coq is also a programming language, so moving to Coq would be a possibility, or maybe a star. So I can see those as possibly candidate language, but not just like let's all go to JavaScript.
Yeah, exactly. So that's some good insight as well. So moving over to baking, I know baking has been wildly successful with the protocol since its inception, and this has been one of the more surprising aspects of it. Just throwing a random stat out there. So, for example, if you had 700 million XTZ and it takes 10,000 XTZ equals one role to become a baker, you could theoretically have 70,000 bakers in the network using these parameters. Now, of course, this won't happen, but that just shows how decentralized the validators in the network can be. Yeah. So what made you come up with these numbers initially? And do you have any plans to lower them, raise them, or any target number in mind for what a role could be in the future?
So let me explain the reason behind the role. There's a technique in proof of stake called, that originally came from some papers that were in context of Bitcoin, called follow the Satoshi. And the idea is that you take a coin and then you track its ownership over time. The benefit of this is that if someone tries to do a malicious branch, an attack branch like a 51% attack on your protocol, then in that branch they can only control the coin that they control. They cannot just shuffle around different addresses and then all of a sudden get better rights. If you have a random number that's generated by your proof of stake algorithm that's going to randomly give rights to people, you don't want people in this branch to say, oh, I'm going to shift my ownership so that I get better rights. So the idea for the Satoshi is that no matter how you shift your money between your addresses, you still own the same coins as if all the coins were labeled. Now the problem with this is that follow the Satoshi is very slow. The ideal way to do it would just be to have a database of every Satoshi or every coin and then say who it belongs to. But you have a lot. If you have 700 million coin, and on top of that in Tezos, the smallest unit is a new Tez. So really, you're closer, and it's closer to 800 million. So 800 million times a million, you're talking like 800 billion. You don't want to have a database with 800 billion entries. So in Tezos, you use the concept of roles, which is a set of coins, and that gives you an approximately the same tracking capabilities. And so at the end of the day, the size of the role is determined by how large your database you want your database to be. How many coins you want to be, how much you want to be tracking. And right now, if you have less than 100,000 entry, it's reasonably fast. But it's one of the things that takes the most time right now in the protocol. It's one of the slowest part of the protocol is keeping track of these roles. So to the extent that this can be made faster, you can have smaller roles, and I do think it can be made faster. So you could get, you could see the roles half the size or even a tenth of the size, but it would be really hard to get it down to a single coin. The other option for doing this would be to say instead we're going to change the way that randomness is generated. We're going to try to generate it more quickly so that you have no option. You can't really shuffle. Shuffling your stake is not going to do anything. Because the randomness just is it just decides for it. It's decided every single block. But that would be another way to do it. So just either playing on the randomness or the efficiency of the database would be the way to do it.
Okay, so yeah, that's definitely a very technical explanation there of what that 10K number means.
But so to give a less technical explanation, sometimes people imagine that this limit is kind of like to restrict it so that people have enough coins or like people have master nodes, and that's really not it at all. The number is as low as it was possible to make it and keep the node relatively efficient. But the goal is to make it as low as possible.
I think we still are in the nascence of the network, and it was best to go with like more conservative numbers for pretty much anything where possible.
Yeah,
because it was really hard to predict. It was really hard to predict how participation would happen and to what extent you could rely on the baking and all that good stuff to be efficient.
So do you foresee this number going lower in the future, potentially through a protocol upgrade? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the foundation is, at the very least, investing a lot of resources into making baking a much more seamless process and much more accessible to people.
Mm-hmm.
So is baking going to be possible on a mobile app wallet for Tezos? I know Core Tez came out recently. Is that in the plans? Something where I could just click a button and run a baking node right on my cell phone?
I don't know that you would want to do that because you still, so, and it depends what you call, there's different levels at which you could be baking. If you run a full node on your phone, you're going to get a lot of bandwidth. The cost of the bandwidth is going to be high. If you're on the data plan, it's going to be expensive. There's still a bunch of CPUs, and it's going to suck your battery. So it's probably not really a good idea to run a baker like this on a cell phone. What you could have, though, is you could have a baker running on a cloud, and you could have the signature on your cell phone so that, once in a while, it's your turn to produce a block. So some cloud service produces a block for you, send it to your cell phone looks at it, makes sure it's okay with it, and then you sign, and then it beeps, and it's like, hey, you have a block to sign. So that I can see working on a cell phone, but not running an entire node.
That'd be a cool project, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a very cool project and something that would probably flourish with the community here. So moving on here, leaving the baking topic, going on to tokenization. It was my thought that Tezos wasn't originally designed to focus on tokenization or ICOs that would run on top of the platform, but any smart contract can facilitate these sort of things. And recently we saw Stephen Andrews, one of the famous developers in the community, come out with a code compiler where you can enter different variable parameters such as total supply, decimal, and create a token. It compiles the code and then you just paste that into the liquidity compiler. What are your thoughts on tokenization, ICOs, that sort of thing happening on top of the Tezos network?
In general, I think that a lot of the dApp tokens don't make a whole lot of sense to me. In general, the idea that it depends on their model, and there's new stacking models which are different, but a lot of the models have been like, well, we're going to have an open source app that anyone can copy, but if you want to use it, you're going to use our special token, which is like money, but less useful. And I just don't see it.
People are just trying to cure incentive problems with participation in their particular, open source project by adding a token to it instead of critically thinking through the necessity of having sort of this model in the first place.
I'm big on crypto assets. I do think there's going to be a lot of asset optimization that's going to happen on a blockchain. So that absolutely. Although for me the most interesting aspect is really just a cryptocurrency aspect. So we'll see asset tokenization. In the early code base for Tezos, there was native support for tokens at the protocol level, so that you don't have to shove them inside a smart contract. So maybe that could come back. But overall, I'm a bit of a dApp skeptic, but I could be wrong, and I also don't want Tezos as a platform to be opinionated on the matter if it doesn't have to be.
That's a good note. Yeah, exactly. So the protocol is there for people to do what they please with it. It can facilitate tokenization, not necessarily having to agree by everyone, but it's out there for people to use.
Yeah. Because if I'm wrong, dApps are actually the future, and everyone wants to run dApps, and it's great. So it's like, well, I don't want to make that kind of. I don't want just like my opinion to have negative influence. So by all means, let's just have a platform that makes people free to do the thing they want to do.
It's not bad to be wrong about something. It's just, yeah. And if anything, we're taking a contrarian position. So.
I like optionality.
And how about we talk a little bit about Stephen Andrews? Man, who is this guy? Did you guys know him before, or?
I met him well, I haven't met him in person. The first time I heard of Stephen Andrews was last year in a meetup in New York via a video link. He presented all the work that he had been doing, and it was pretty amazing. So he's a dude that lives in New Zealand, and he's very active in Tezos and has been building a lot of cool projects, and is generally seen as a saint by the community.
I personally thought it was a pseudonym for 5 to 6 people, just based on the prodigious output. But yeah, no, Stephen was great, and it's also very nice having someone in New Zealand while you're living in Paris. If you ever have insomnia, Stephen Andrews is a pretty good person to hit up at night, or his day. Yeah, it's just kind of nice things like that remind you that this is a rather large global, global movement at the end of the day, and you don't necessarily have to meet people who you owe a debt of gratitude to for contributing to the ecosystem. But yeah, he's a very avuncular chap.
And maybe you guys could even provide consultation on some of his project names, because recently he came out with one, Skynet, and that didn't go over too well with the community either. So
nobody's perfect. He's changing. Apparently he's changing that, but
we don't know that he came up with the name.
Well, it's true, but it is pretty funny.
I mean, they're not changing the name because it's ominous, but because it's used like in other projects. And I don't know why the other project is such an ominous name, but hey.
It's provocative, that's for sure.
It does something about it.
Yeah, exactly.
So how about your thoughts on decentralization? Do you believe Tezos is currently decentralized? What's your definition of decentralized, and how do you keep Tezos moving in that direction?
So I have my own very pedantic definition of decentralization, and there's a blog post on the topic called by M. Goodman called Decentralization. You keep using that word, and I don't think it means what you think it means. And that's a good blog post. Basically, the idea, so for me, the definition of decentralization is that no party has de jure more power than any other party, right? And so that's that I would say is a decentralized is something that's decentralized. Now that doesn't prevent hierarchy. So one example in that post of a hierarchical system that's decentralized is embryogenesis. So in embryogenesis, you start with just one cell that divides and is going to give an embryo, and at the end of the day, you create an animal or a human, and so you create a very hierarchical structure. But you do this with cells which each have exactly the same code, but they're self-organized in the system. So for me, decentralization is really a de jure consideration. Now, of course, when people talk about decentralization, they're more talking about the de facto concentration of power, and what they mean by decentralization is having a very flat power structure. And clearly, this de facto centralization is important as well. And I think that a lot of what Tezos tries to do is maximize that decentralization, both in the evolution of the protocol, both in the way that the proof of stake algorithm is designed. So, for example, sometimes we've been compared with delegated proof of stake. So delegated proof of stake is a good example of a system that's fairly hierarchical because you have a few people who are going to hold a lot of power over the network, but which is still decentralized because, in some sense, these people could have been anyone, and no one started out with any stronger role than anyone else. But it's still fairly concentrated, and Tezos really tries to get as flat as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just comparing it to other chains, the amount of validators that can participate is certainly much greater in Tezos compared to, let's say, EOS doing another delegated proof of stake model where they only have, I believe it's 21 validators, where Tezos, I think, is running at between 400 and 500 bakers currently. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, I mean, we were trying to kind of make liquid proof of stake happen to distinguish ourselves from this idea of having a fixed amount of people validating the chain and sort of jockeying for these spots, as opposed to having the ability to opt in and out and participate and have your voice heard in some way. or just resigning that role to someone else in a very dynamic fashion.
Yeah, there was a time, and we said 2013, 2014, where the Bitcoin community was very concerned about centralization of mining power. Like that was a big deal, and I don't think centralization of mining power is much better today, but it's kind of been abandoned as a concern. And I think that's too bad, because if you're going to pay so much for a consensus algorithm, it's just like not right that it's in the hand of just a few people.
So for what it's worth, I think like that's what will harbor long-term engagement with Tezos is like this ability for people to participate in such a dynamic fashion and have their voice heard, and the malleability of the design or the architecture of the blockchain is actually very appealing for getting people to get involved. I think things like voter apathy in the U.S. is largely spurred by the fact that you don't really see much difference either way when you go to the ballot box and you click on red or blue. I think what's kind of nice about having a relatively small, obviously compared to most other political bodies you could participate in, group of, or processes, is that you actually see outputs based on your inputs, and you feel as though you have a larger stake or a larger bearing on the outcomes of the process. And I think that's actually a really strong part of the Tezos community nowadays, and really being able to delegate or do it yourself with relative ease is hugely important to getting this type of deep engagement that's going to allow Tezos to iterate really quickly.
There were several design constraints in the Tezos proof of stake algorithm, which I think are valuable and are not present in other projects, which is that one was that if you have 0.1% of the stake, you should be able to create 0.1% of the blocks. So this fairness aspect, like even if you have a small stake, there's not going to be a threshold where you're too small, you're not going to, or its place is going to be very, very small threshold. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is the people who stake should not be you should not have to immobilize capital in order to stake. And so there are some bonds in Tezos, but they are a smaller fraction overall of the stake. So really, you can still keep most of the money mass moving freely, while still saying like, hey, but at this point I have this, or on average I have this fraction of the money mass. Therefore, on average I create this fraction of the blocks. So keeping these two properties together, I think, is pretty good for decentralization, and is not something you see in other systems.
Which gets to a pretty pertinent topic that a lot of people have been asking about in Riot and in Reddit, which is like, how divorced should ownership of the token and validation of the ledger be, and how does that relate to governance?
Yeah, that's a long topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that stuck out to me during that was you don't want to demobilize assets. I think that's a great point. Whether you're baking or staking, there's no real lockup period if you wanted to unstake. Comparing it back to EOS again, so if you're staking in EOS and you actually want to unstake those tokens, it takes a 72-hour waiting period for you to regain access to move those tokens. In Tezos, let's say you're delegating, participating in the dividend reward system through baking, you can actually move those tokens out of that delegation smart contract instantly. That is just a really cool feature of Tezos to me, being a participant. So you guys also touched on community, and I think we can almost talk on that here. I think Tezos has one of the strongest communities, may not be the largest yet, but I think it's one of the strongest communities that's formed over the past year. Definitely one of the strongest based out of this recent wave of blockchain 3.0 ICOs that took place. You guys just want to give your opinion on what you've seen come out of the community and how much responsibility that each participant in the community is taking upon their shoulders to further the success of the protocol. What are your opinions on that?
Well, I mean, speaking personally, I've been very charmed to see a number of people, contact me and reach out to me privately. There's some people who are very vocal. I think that, there's a whole spectrum spanning from Brian Jesperson, who became president of the Tezos Foundation. Obviously, that was a little above and beyond. Just people who log in and read Reddit occasionally and then, shoot me a note or whatever. We try to read pretty much everything that comes in our inbox so we don't have to reply. But basically what I see a lot in Tezos is a sense of sort of civic duty. And what I like about it is, if I'm putting on my hat and I'm thinking about what this logically could be, I think it's going to require a lot more than just saying like, oh well, you know, so we gave money to a Swiss nonprofit a year ago, like let's like let them take care of things. That attitude doesn't get any project very far. Like the Swiss Foundation is like one piece of you know what Tezos is, and in fact it's actually a relatively small piece of the puzzle because it can only do so much. It's just an entity that gives out grants. What really will make this a powerful and compelling project to participate in is, you know, the sort of innovation that you see coming up from like the Stephen Andrews of the world, who use their creativity and they try to add value in interesting ways by making proposals and actually posing interesting questions to the group and the community. And really this like willingness to engage and grapple with what it means to have an actual blockchain, you know, take into account different governance proposals is an exotic thing that literally no one else has ever, you know, collectively stumbled upon or tried to do. And sort of creating a cryptocurrency that's meant to be widely used is going to take a lot more than just you know, leaning on a few people. It really requires a lot of participation from everyone who's involved. And so I see that a lot in Tezos, maybe because, you know, the foundation had struggles early on and it kind of had the community call upon it to really take action and vocalize their opinion and their voice. Maybe, you know, that had a little bit to do with it. But I think by and large, like the fact that the original instantiation or the original parameters for the launch of the Tezos network empowers so many people does mean that there's sort of this inherent sense of responsibility and civic duty that you know, if you want to get involved and if you want to have your voice heard, I think this is much more likely than if you go into another blockchain project and you just like yammer on Twitter all day, which is by and large the only other source of voice that you have in this ecosystem.
Yeah, it's the community is definitely one of the strongest positives here in Tezos, and I think during the ICO there was something like 30,000 wallets opened. Compare that to Ethereum's ICO, what was it, 6,000 wallets? So a great head start there, for sure.
Well, it's a much different time, but
and you know, it's a unique challenge for proof of stake because in proof of work. So you know, when proof of work came out, one of the things that people were saying about Bitcoin is great because, you know, proof of work is indispensable as a way to initially distribute your tokens, right? People are going to mine them, and you know, so that does bring security to the network. But at the end of the day, you're saying, you know, oh man, all the all the Bitcoins that were ever acquired, you had to burn the same cost in electricity. And there's a lot of gesticulation trying to make it like a law of nature that you have to destroy value in order to get value, which is just nonsensical. But yeah, that's how it was done. And some early projects like Counterparties, they wanted to, you know, it didn't make sense to have proof of work for them because they were built on top of Bitcoin. And so how do you distribute it? And they were like, well, you know, we're just going to burn it. You know, it was proof of burn. Like, burn some tokens and we'll give you other tokens. Like, you need one way, you need a way of rationing the tokens that are going to form your initial base of token holders. And it's, you know, it makes a lot more sense as a rationing mechanism to put that into a nonprofit who's going to
have a legal mandate.
Have a legal mandate to promote research, promote a lot of good, you know, a lot of good things, and then just burn it. It's a pretty natural, it's a pretty natural thing for for proof of stake system. I mean, otherwise, you're saying that no, the only way we're ever gonna get tokens in the hand of people is if they buy, you know, if they spend a lot of electricity, or if they buy other tokens from other people who spend a lot of electricity. I mean, it's weird.
Yeah, but you see a lot of sort of like moving tea leaves around to try to justify like the original design of Bitcoin and to somehow rationalize it as sort of the only way to go. So, you know, anytime you're doing something new,
lots of sour grapes.
Well, that's like not even, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, this is more like defining value in terms of something else. It's like another form of alchemy, but perhaps more modern.
It's funny because you have like this like gold libertarians who are like adopting the labor's theory of value to defend proof of work, and that's amazing.
Oh yeah, that's funny. Yeah, it's like early days of Bitcoin, you read like the weirdest criticisms of it from like the most hardcore libertarians.
I mean, I understand Bitcoin maximalism because at the end of the day, these things are shilling points, and Bitcoin is in a prime position to be the shilling point that wins out as being the most liquid form of money. I totally get the argument.
Like
I think it's overstated, but I totally get the argument. But the thing that blows my mind is the proof of work maximalism. But anyways, enough with the parenthesis.
Yeah, we're gonna get a lot of nasty tweets about that. So, yeah, but that's kind of the gist of it. It's like we do think that by allowing people to basically have their voice heard, we're giving people a license and much more leeway to actually interact with what we're doing, and we see that come out of space. So I'm happy with it for now.
I mean, I'm confident at different levels, but different thing in this space. And so, how important is governance? Okay, I'm pretty confident about that. And like, how important is, proof of stake going to be? And I would say, like, among all of these kind of more contrarian choices, proof of stake is definitely the one I'm most confident about. I have the least doubt about that.
Well, yeah, that's a pretty extensive part of like the. Anyway, and the other thing that I like about Tezos, and I can say this now that like the foundation has kind of found its sea legs, is like the people who are most vocally involved with Tezos, who I think like tend to represent Tezos in one way or another, either through like force or through selection from the community, tend to have like a pretty nice demeanor to them, and like nice communities I think will probably thrive in the end, because ultimately you have to like be inclusive if you're gonna make this stuff successful. You can't like marginalize 51% of the population and like make it a human woman haters club and then have like the new paradigm for money or whatever. I found that like the Tezos community is very, very accepting and overall very nice. Same with the Zcash community, a few of the other ones that I really admire. So trying to like keep the community even tempered is unfortunately a tone that comes from the top. I think like the most vitriolic projects tend to have like very vitriolic leaders, unfortunately. And maybe that feels good in the first like few iterations of it, but we can be pretty snarky. We try not to be. But
well, the best thing is to not be at the top. That way it doesn't matter if I'm snarky.
Well, yeah, but like whether we like it or not, like what we say is reflected as part of what Tezos represents.
Don't reflect me.
Yeah. But just in general, like trying to emulate that, and I think people like Brian Jesperson hold that mantle very well by being extraordinarily gracious and diplomatic, even when it's extraordinarily hard. So just trying to keep the tone measured is important.
Yeah, no, I believe niceness. I'm not a nice person, but I believe niceness is very important. So.
Yeah, we like intellectually value it. It's
it's
yeah.
Like the spirit is strong, but the flesh is weak.
Oh yeah, very weak. So, but we see the riot room. We see the way other people interact with the community, and they are very nice, and I think that's very important.
Yeah, I mean, the community to me is one of the biggest draws to Tezos, and it was actually Tezos was the project that forced me to start making videos and to start my own Crypto Live League project here. So you've inspired me
I feel
to.
extra bad for your fiance then.
Yeah, exactly.
I should have offered her my condolences.
So getting into projects, how about we talk about both Kathleen and Arthur here, if you want to talk about what your current or future projects are.
Yeah, so, for a while we were just kind of focused on making sure that all the cool people who we thought were part of the community were like interacting with the foundation or interacting with other parts of the community really well. I'm sort of a Yenta between a lot of the community, and I try to vary expertise where I can. But I think Tezos is in a pretty good spot right now, so I've started to take my eye off of that and focusing more of my efforts on what I see as the big adoption issue in cryptocurrencies right now, which is like the inability or the user experience for the average layperson. And so my goal is to make smart contracts more accessible in the long term being like the next 5 or 10 years. The hook that I'm using for that is something that I actually like quite enjoy, which is digital collectible card games. I think they have a unique opportunity to work with smart contracts in a fun and hopefully challenging way. I found pretty good co-founder for that new venture, so it'll be. I obviously would have the same chemistry as I do with Arthur, but
I hope so.
Yeah. But I found someone really cool, and in general, like I pair really well with talented talented engineers and talented tinkerers. And this guy's particularly passionate about the digital collectible card space. So the idea is to build a kick-ass game and then have Tezos be sort of the hook into building more accessible tooling for smart contracts. And so at the end of the day, hopefully we get two things. We get an awesome card game, and then we get an awesome, way for people to interact with Tezos in a meaningful way. So I don't know if I'll achieve both, but certainly one of the two would be fine.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to do is get as many awesome people as possible working on Tezos, because that's, even though Kathleen is right, that's right. One of the biggest issues in the space right now is lack of adoption. It's still very, very small community. There's still, I do believe in the infrastructure building period thesis, and so I think there's still a lot of details, and I want to make sure that everything that's built on Tezos is on very robust foundation, that Tezos is very secure, but it's also fast, that it has a reliable governance mechanism.
Well, to be fair, that's where you can contribute much more than I can. So that's
I'm trying to do my strengths.
Yeah, exactly. Like Arthur can pick up a paper and push it in a week. Like he's selling himself a little short. But I think it's good for Arthur to focus on the core protocols. That's really where his strength lies in sort of selling economic incentives and factoring that into what makes sense from a game theoretic perspective when you're thinking about upgrades to Tezos. And really reasoning through that, whereas I like things that sit on top of the board. So
that sounds like some really good stuff. Really excited for this digital collectible card game, and also really excited for Arthur to keep working for the Tezos protocol and attracting new talent into the protocol. So, speaking of the current state of the chain, do you want to touch on if there's any shielded transactions, if there's any Z-Snark integration, any kind of privacy preservation models that you guys are actively working on folding into the protocol that is already there, or your thoughts on those areas?
There's someone who's built like a binding library between the Rust library for sampling Zcash and OCAML. So there's some early integration of the Zcash circuits, but it's not quite there yet. But I mean, it's something that strikes me as absolutely critical. At the end of the day, all these blockchains, what they're trying to do is e-cash, and one of the most important property of cash is that it can preserve privacy. And there's also, and I think this is an important thing to understand about these models of the snark, is that they're not about secrecy necessarily; they're about privacy, and there's a big difference. So privacy doesn't mean that everything is going to be secret, because you have a viewing key on these transactions. And so, if you have to demonstrate that, your books are in order, you can get the viewing key and you can show it. So you can show it, if someone comes to you and say like, hey, where does all this money come from? What are your transactions? You can open your books, which is the way it currently works in the financial system. Whereas is Bitcoin or Tezos or Ethereum, you're broadcasting everything to everyone. So it's kind of like a privacy disaster. And so the idea is to go back towards a more normal system where, you voluntarily disclose the contents of your transactions. And, I think that's something that's perfectly normal and that really should be in every cryptocurrency in existence.
Wow, that sounds really interesting, actually. It almost reminds me of working the books in a custodial banking firm for a mutual fund, how you can open the books and close the books to show certain aspects when called upon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. But you're not broadcasting your books to everyone. It's people are imagining like, oh, private transactions for criminals. No, it's like, look, you're a company. You're buying stuff from your suppliers. You don't want your competitors knowing what you're buying from your supplier. You don't want to broadcast everything to everyone.
That's a good example of like sour grapes in this. You don't need that anyway. It's like, whereas it's like very much a fundamental.
No, I think I would say most people agree on the importance of privacy, but the difficulties are that it's complicated, so the math is difficult. Zcash, which are the most efficient way of achieving privacy, they still rely on a trusted setup. So there are genuine limitations to the current to the existing systems. I think the trade-off is still positive and is still vastly in favor of adopting these technologies. But there's a lot of cool stuff coming. So They are now what people call stars, which are the same as Snark, but transparent in the sense that you don't need a trusted setup. And there's different versions, different ways of achieving that. So you could do zero knowledge transactions using things like bulletproof. There's also Hirax, Zkibu. I mean, there's a bunch of different protocols coming out which don't rely on a trusted set of assumption. And of course, the stars themselves, which are based on TCPs.
Well, I am with you on that. I think it would be a total positive value add for the protocol if something like that got folded in, where you had the capability to call on or open the books on a certain account if needed. That would be groundbreaking, especially for commercial applications, in my opinion. Okay, so moving on to a more general question here. So how would you vision on how to get true adoption for Tezos or cryptocurrency in general?
How do you get true adoption for Tezos? I mean, I think you have to build something that people need, and that's something something that people want. And it's true that a lot of this space has been a technology in need of in search of a problem. I think there's basically three categories of problems that are where these technologies are helpful. The number one is censorship resistance. It's like you want to do transactions, but your transactions will naturally be censored, and that could be because maybe you're a political activist in a country which has a very oppressive government. So that's a good use case for censorship resistance. But that's not going to be huge adoption. Not many people are living in these circumstances. Many people are more than happy to just get their Venmo payments, and that might work for them. The second use case is very large-scale coordination, where it's really hard to find a common trusted party, particularly cross-border. So let's say you want to be some sort of huge organization that really are in multiple countries, really decentralized across the world, and you could try and find a common party, but if your organization is very meaningful and important to its members, maybe you don't want to trust some outside party to manage it for you. And so using, I think, blockchains and dApps actually is a good way of managing that. And the third thing is, and that's more in the vein of what Kathleen was describing earlier, is you're a company, but you want to tie your hand in a specific way to make your product offering more valuable. So, for example, if you're a collectible card games, you want to show people that, hey, there are very, very hard rules that are in charge of issuance that we don't control. Or if, let's say, you want to be a new video platform, and you can say, you know what, we're going to make this real life video platforms, but we don't control who your followers are. You can be free to move to other systems. We don't control your monetization. So as a way of committing not to be a monopoly, so that you attract more of a market. So for me,
or not to be evil in the case of Facebook and
yes.
Yeah.
So one project which really gets that. The third point I think is Blockstacks. They clearly saw a lot about that, and they have this motto which is can't be evil. So they're really going in that direction. So for me, those are the 3D use case. I mean, my own sensibilities make me more interested in the first one. That's the one that's more, I would say, political and idealistic. But I also think number 2 and number 3 are fairly important, and they may reach a larger amount of people.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, definitely some good thoughts there. How about Stephen Andrews has a project, Velos, which is supposedly an open source replacement for PayPal. Do you know much about that? You want to make a comment on Velos?
So I just read the blog. I just read the Reddit post about it, and from my understanding, it's kind of like, it's kind of like a layer 2 solution where someone places a large bond on the chain, and then they do a bunch of transactions. And if there's any and if anyone departs from the rules, they can the bond can be slashed. So it's similar to some of the stuff that's being worked with in Plasma or in the Lightning Network. It's a layer 2 solution, and I think those are great. I've said it often. I believe more in off-chain scaling than on-chain scaling, because not every copy purchase just belongs on a permanent immutable record. So yeah, that's a cool solution. I hope that he's involved in a lot of projects. So I hope that he builds this or someone builds something of the sort.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm really excited to see what comes down the pipeline for DApps, anything built on top of Tezos, and where the governance folds in the future as well. So this was a great interview, Arthur and Kathleen. Thank you again for coming on this channel. I feel, really blessed to have you guys on here. We started from very simple roots, and now we have the founder and co-founder of Tezos here on our channel. So definitely want to thank you guys again. So if anyone in the audience wants to get information for grant applications, developer information, baking information, you can either go to the Slack channel, the Riot channel, or now the Telegram channel, which is pretty active for Tezos, or you can go to tezos.foundation. Do you guys want to make any sort of closing statement here?
Because also log into Riot and try to get to the community. They're pretty nice folks overall. So
yeah, and I would say so we have some technical members in the community which contribute by building cool projects. There are people who are also technical but necessary programmers who are helping by filing bugs. One of the things that many people can do, which is very helpful, is just like writing about Tezos. There's a bit of a paucity of information that's available online about the project, and so people writing about the project, writing about their experience and how they how they use it and what they learn about it. I think that can be very helpful.
Yeah. Excellent, guys. Well, thank you again for coming on and really enjoyed it. Hopefully we can have you back on here in the future. If you guys want, feel free, welcome to come on. Again, thank you for watching Crypto Live Leak, guys. Be sure to subscribe on the button below. Turn on that notification button. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we have our own Telegram as well, all at Crypto Live Leak. Thanks again, guys.
Right.
Until next time.
Thank you.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.